Okay, I'm Steve Chapman from the Walt Disney Studios. Is anyone here from Lidar Lounge? That's how good t-shirts work, because I read that on the back of your shirt, and it's effective advertising. So one of my jobs is to find ways to apply AR and VR. I'm going to do the TED Talk thing here, to disciplines that are not normally included in the creative process. So it could be anything from the post-production editing to the guy who puts out the craft services, the cast meals. You know, anybody can use AR and VR if it will help them do their jobs better. Maybe it'll tell the guy that he's running out of sandwiches or something. So we look at it as not what can we do with AR and VR, it's what can we do for you with these technologies that are just coming on the scene. Don't have audio, unfortunately, so this will not make as much sense as it would have. But it is an introduction to what we did here and what we're about to show you. So Walt Disney built the Burbank Studios in 1942 to make two-dimensional animation. And when he passed away in 1967, he essentially left his office untouched. It was stored away for a while, but then put back into place as a sort of tribute and museum. And it is on the third floor of this 1942 brick building on the San Andreas Fault. So it will, possibly be damaged at some point. And we were looking at ways to use the AR, VR technology to allow people to not only preserve the items, but also to have people examine them in person. Because right now, you can't just walk in there and start picking up Walt's belongings. Yeah, we're going to have to make it. So here's where his office is now, and we built this video as sort of an introduction to the VR experience for people standing in line waiting to see it. But I will speed it up a little bit and talk about who we are. We are the Technology Innovation Group at the studio. Use this stuff not to impress you so much with the technology, but to show you that we have an appreciation of where we came from and what our roots are, and are looking at ways to use AR and VR to explore those old technologies to see what we can learn from them, because it's really hard to just look at a textbook and understand some of these things. So being able to pick them up, operate them, and see them in person in VR is really turning out to be effective. Here's one of Walt's early VR experiments in multi-plane animation. It's much cooler with the sound. So you can look at old cartoons to get the idea of what the process was, but the actual process is about to show up here as soon as I stop doing this shuffling thing. So this is the device Walt built to do the animation on multiple planes. And right now, there's not much way to find out how that works, but by building it in VR and being able to operate it yourself, we can learn things about the way things were done and what decisions were made and why, because we're actually there. This is our founder, iWorks, early research in green screen technology, except he found that fluorescent lights have a certain tungsten frequency spike. And if he put the screen behind the actors that exactly matched that spike, then he could filter out and make a perfect matte on here without any kind of digital technology whatsoever. So it's interesting to try and learn how these things were done. Walt was frustrated with conventional projection technology. Here you see a fully loaded gas truck driving in front of the Capitol building in traditional 4x3 projection format. And they couldn't remove the cars. This was better with the sound. So he decided to build a virtual reality theater in the 1950s and patented it himself and the department founder. Look at that cool car. But this is all the record that still exists of that technology, this record is limited by the fact that the recording technology isn't sufficient enough to capture the environment, the room, and the 24-frame film on video. So by rebuilding this in virtual reality, we can experience what the audience actually experienced. And it helps inform things we do, like this soaring over the world attraction you see on the right there. Here's some of our early virtual reality experiments. I shouldn't have put the date there, that way I could shock you with how early it was, but it is essentially a tethered headset with full freedom of movement and a augmented reality hand controller, or virtual reality hand controller, to allow you to operate a flying carpet. And this is some of the stuff our department currently works on, which I can't talk about. It's the usual forward-facing, public-facing side of the company. But let's talk about this stuff that most of you probably won't get to see because it's an in-house research tool. And this is the scope of the project we're about to describe, is the Walt's office. This is just an iPhone shot to give you an idea of how much work had to go into recreating this virtually. So it began with a lot of photography, just so we had a record of what we needed to do. But beyond that, we also needed to take texture pictures of every object to apply them in 3D. And do color matching and all sorts of archival kind of stuff that really helps it be accurate. Guess I'm running out of battery and time, so I'll skip this one. The first thing we did, that's why I mentioned Lidar Lounge, is we used the Lidar Scanner that we use for designing theme park attractions to start with and scan the office. Some of the benefits there are really accurate dimensions. The liabilities are that it costs a lot of money, and the fidelity is not high enough to capture the smaller objects like the props. So you really need to have different kinds of scanning technology for different kinds of objects. We tried some newfangled things like the Tango on some of the artifacts because we couldn't affect them in any way. Normally if I was scanning a chrome stapler, then I might spray it with foot powder or developer spray to make it white so that the scanner can pick it up properly. But we weren't allowed to do anything like that because it was a museum type of situation. So we came up with different ways to use photogrammetry to do the same work. And here's some tips and tricks if you want to try to do the same process on your scenes. Here's a list of the software we used. And one of our tips is that we used cross-polarized lighting on all the photography. So each of the lamps that we used to light the object has a linear polarizer on it, and the camera has a cross-oriented polarizer in front of the lens so that no specular highlights or reflections can get directly to the camera. And we're essentially just photographing the color of the object, not the lighting of the room that's affecting the object. Yeah, we put that together with a Lazy Susan and some targets to help us orient the photogrammetry. I'm assuming y'all know what photogrammetry is. That really didn't work well because we couldn't auto-detect our markers because of the angle we were shooting at, and it was a pain to try to manually align all these photographs. So we came up with this Lazy Susan with photogrammetry paint on it, which, believe it or not, it works so well that often with objects like this phone where there's not a lot of texture, we would get a perfect scan of the Lazy Susan and just enough info on the phone to rebuild it in 3D in Maya. But some objects refused to cooperate at all, so we ended up projecting textures onto those objects to overcome their own intrinsic surface characteristics. So we shot a noise pattern onto this bronze statue, for example, to photograph it. A trick we used was to fake reflections, simply by mirroring the object vertically and making it a little bit transparent. And that saved a lot on GPU capacity for some of the other things we wanted to do. So when we decided we had enough artifacts, am I running out of time here? 6 minutes. To build the entire scene, we went to our go-to guide for building video games, which is Scott Rogers' Level Up, because he's a former Disney Imagineer. And not only that, it's a great book too. We looked at Unreal and Unity and Panda 3D, which, believe it or not, is our own 3D engine. I think we open sourced it. We also looked at all the different VR technologies. And we ended up going with Vive because we could walk around, and Unity because we kind of like C# better than C++. We had to deal with things like outside the office window. We didn't have any photographic record of any decent quality of what that looked like in 1940 or 50. So we ended up deciding, let's just make it nighttime so we can do a silhouette and make it easy for ourselves. So we built a kind of cyclorama behind the set and did a simple 2D cutout of the mountains and water tower. Then the Vive was so new at the time that we really didn't know what we were doing, so we basically wrote everything ourselves. And then finally realized afterwards that, hey, there's already a preset for, sorry, I gotta get rid of that. Computers, right? And that's the battery. Okay, well, thanks for coming. I sent them the presentation twice. 2 copies. So I apologize for that, but that's the gist of it. We rebuilt Walt's office in VR.
Well, we do a couple things. We could find an adapter to plug into your computer.
If you guys have time, sure.
Or if you want to take a question.
It's one of the new USB-C only ones that are so brilliant. A question?
I'll be happy to ask. Oh, please.
I'm sorry. I guess there's a microphone. It's not your fault.
This is a great song.
Molly's.
I was just saying, did you scan all the ashtrays?
There were about, we counted, I think, something like that, yeah, ashtrays in there, different times. But interestingly, they were all, or most of them were glass, so we couldn't really scan them. So that was where you had to just get out a set of micrometers and measure them and make blueprints for ashtrays.
Thank you for this look into, something that I think a lot of people will not necessarily get to see in person. It was really valuable to see the process behind it, and also inspiring to see Disney's attention to learning from the past is really neat. Could you talk a little bit about the different kinds of roles of the people who were involved in doing the archival research and then deciding what the experience was going to be like?
Mm-hmm. We came from the side of the studio that, sorry, I'm just checking on this situation here. I think we might be back and running here. That does film production, and we had envisioned our dream VR scene, which was when Ready Player One's released, you're in there in VR. Unfortunately, we didn't own that property. So, we decided in order to convince some of the other filmmakers that this would be a good idea to do to their film sets, that we would just do this test piece with Walt's office. So working with the Disney Archives, who curates that collection, they handled bringing in each object for scanning, and then we did the scanning, and they brought it back with their museum gloves and everything. We didn't have a lot of leeway with what we wanted to do. We couldn't walk in certain places. But that points out the value of the end result is that now you can sit down where Walt sat, whereas in the real office, you can only walk on these narrow plastic mats. And we learned things like, hopefully I'll be able to show you. I know it's the last, you guys are dying to get out of here.
Give it a minute.
Oh, okay. We learned things like, for example, that researchers could go in and not only see what was on Walt's bookshelf, but we programmed in the ability to pick up those books and see what was inside them. Not every page, because we realized it was going to be so much work that we'd just never get it done. But we gave enough information that you could see where the author had signed it to Walt or some other unique element of it. But not only that, we found that although all the books are out of print, you can actually go on Amazon and buy them used, and then you can start to read things knowing the rest of the Disney history. You can read into it what might have influenced Walt's decisions and what his real hobbies and interests might have been. Because, like, for example, a lot of people think he was an avid polo player, but he did that for like 3 months and then gave it up. But there are legends out there like that that we can research and corroborate or not.
Full power study.
It took like a minute to come up the first time, a minute ago. So we're finding that it is kind of a gestalt where there's more to it than just the fact that there's a bunch of props in a VR scene, that you're seeing a reflection of someone who was important in entertainment history, at least. And you can learn about some of the things he might have been thinking, and just by the value of what he chose to have around him for most of his career, what was truly important to him. And you can see books like, you mentioned ashtrays. There's a book on, it was titled Smoking and You. And it was about the effects of smoking, which, back in the 50s, there wasn't the Surgeon General's warning. So, yeah, my screen went blank too. Is there an earphone piece on that? Both of them? Okay. I'm a nerd, I don't have strength. Okay. It's just, so if you could all see it, it would be It's great.
I'll do another question if you have time.
Oh, yeah, yeah, sorry.
So thank you for this. This is, I mean, we're all here for this, and it's amazing. And your dedication to quality, right, to every detail. I mean, it kind of speaks to the whole Disney story. For me as a game developer, I realized that, you know, I could capture a very high quality asset and then capture another high quality asset. By the time I'm done with the scene, I have to sacrifice and essentially decimate and make the models way less quality just so I can present the finished product. Is that something you guys found where at some point you were like, why are we even going this far if we
Well,
can't?
one of the things we realized was that because we were using a photographic process to scan these, those photographs could be stored separately, and then as new technologies and new algorithms are developed, we can go back to them and apply the latest thing. So we might come out with a 100 million polygon model to begin with, and we'll decimate it down to what we need to work in the Vive, but next year, that can be upgraded to the next level that it can handle. Oh, yeah, sorry. This is going to be really anticlimactic. Yeah, so Lidar Lounge is in Vancouver, right? You guys? UK. Ah, you guys do movie scanning?
Yeah, we actually just did the Mary Poppins.
Oh, really?
Cross-polarized, and then we were working on all the sets, and it was something that we always thought of because obviously we're handing over these digital assets, and we kind of think, you know, with budgets and obviously the VR, do they have something that they put to the side for using this later down the line? Because it was obviously, it's all very good data.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons we also one of the reasons we wanted to involve the archives is because we realized that there's a lot of your kind of work going on, and that's going to visual effects vendors all over the world.
Yeah.
And that data is sort of spread out everywhere.
Yeah.
So that when we decide we want to do something for movie marketing or a sequel, or the AR, VR stuff, it's almost impossible to find.
Yeah, no, totally. It's well, interesting for us because our journey has always been within film, and we've always been doing, you know, the Lidar scanning and adding now photogrammetry onto the sets to give some realism. And then with this technology emerging, it's kind of been a really natural progression to offer services within this domain. But yeah, the film industry and what it obviously, the sets that are incredible that are built and everything that's there, and you think they get striked at the end and they go, but actually to have these captures are so important, and they can be perhaps explored more so in the future as it becomes more available. And it's great to know that, yeah, all the studios, they do in fact store all this data. It's just obviously not being used yet, you know, to as much as they possibly could.
Right, there's a lot of sentimentality for something like Mary Poppins, but literally the day after they shoot the scene with a set, it will be gone, and lost forever.
Yeah.
Without some kind of record.
We have 5 minutes.
Okay. They've reset the clock for us.
But just on the point of what you've done here, I think it's brilliant. It's really, really great to see.
Yeah, no, we were experimenting with different ways to present the controller in VR, and I am totally positive that our 2D artist took the upper left one from the toilet button in our bathrooms. But we were looking at ways to gamify it. Is that security warning up there still? Try and ignore that. This is corporate stuff. Like, for example, pointing a flashlight at an artifact and having the shadow on the wall become alive and animated. You know, ways to gamify the experience so that it wasn't just a cold reproduction. But we ended up throwing all of that out because the reproduction turned out to be just fine. People had a lot of fun with it. So we thought about having a futuristic scanner that you bring back in time and you put artifacts on it, and the character will tell you some history about it. We thought about placing these markers around the room so that when you intersected them, it would give you a little story. Again, one of the benefits of not realizing there were templates for a lot of the Vive stuff was we experimented with making our own, and we didn't end up using our own versions of things that already existed, which is fine because you learn that way. Made a few mistakes and did things like picking up music would make that song play, which is pretty easy for us because we had the rights to the music already. We came up with something we really liked, which was the pop-up museum. When you pick up an artifact or certain artifacts, we could tell a story about them. For example, Walt loved aviation so much that he, in World War I, paid a French pilot to take him in the air for $50, which he was like 18 years old. So that was a lot of money, but he loved it. And it carried through to his creations like the theme parks, the transportation systems. There's that story about the books I was telling you. We rigged the books with bone skeletal animation because if you just scale them to 0 and then rig them and then scale them back to what they belong in size, then you could have a really simple animation applied to it. Oh, check this out. Walt not only got Upton Sinclair's autograph, but apparently it was a library book. So certain artifacts Walt had carried with him through his entire life. This was one of them, and we believe it kind of informed and inspired his love of animation. So we thought things like this, we must have operating in the experience. So, which is difficult because it's based on mirror reflections to create the illusion of animation. We went through playtesting with about 50 people. Kids loved it. But we realized if we just throw them into the experience cold, then a lot of the magic disappears because they're spending most of their first few minutes trying to learn how VR works. It's new to most people. So they're learning which control does what and how to operate them. And it just didn't work to have that happen inside Walt's office. So luckily we had Lidar scan the secretary's room here and repurposed this as a tutorial room where you had to learn everything before going in to the main experience. So in that room, we built a projector that showed an animated slideshow of the basics of the Vive controls. And further, to keep the experience enclosed in the VR world, instead of having someone yelling at the person through their headsets what to do, we came up with this phone that if you picked up a phone in Walt's office, this phone would ring and the operator could talk to you, or you could call them if you were the sysop, so to speak, and tell them what they're doing wrong or how much time they have left. You know, anything that we needed to communicate without just making them realize that they're still in the real world. So we made it part of the VR. So this is how that tutorial room worked out. You watch the movie a little bit. This, again, makes a lot more sense with sound. But, sorry. You would be told to pick up the phone and, what's that? Oh, really? They did plug in something here, but it's not loud. Okay, so we took the exposition to Tokyo, built an attraction poster, realized we had troubles with some of our content because it was Japan, and a lot of the stuff Walt did during World War II was because the government had taken over the company to have him make propaganda films. So a lot of the content had to be edited for a Japanese display. This is the attraction in Japan. They had these rooms with curtains on every side, or walls and curtains. And we removed the tutorial altogether, and one of their guys just explained to the person in line what to do. And they read a script, and once the person was in the room, these curtains opened, and the operator could then see them. So when you walk into this VR experience, all you see is the black curtains in the room until they're in VR. And some of those books I talked about. Well, here's an interesting fact if we have time. We don't have time. Okay, we're out. Okay, wait, one last cool thing. We found that we could take old movies, old films of Walt's, and send them through the same software and rebuild the scenes in 3D. So we resurrected old movie sets that we're now going to put in VR so you can stand on set in the 1950s and learn how things were done there. All right, thanks.